Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we discuss culturally relevant topics to equip you to share your faith more effectively. I'm Sandra Dimes, and I'm joined with Jeff Zweerink. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Sandra. Always fun to talk with you.
Yeah. So you're an astrophysicist, and we're
am.
going to be talking about space.
Cool. I like that. So.
And actually what we're going to be talking about, this is so cool. There apparently was this teenage intern, and his first couple weeks being at NASA, he discovered a new planet.
Well, it's interesting because they had there's an algorithm. They look at lots of different stars, and so they've got some algorithms or some computer software that goes through and sorts them out and says this may be this may be that. And so he was looking through ones where you got binary stars, and he was looking at the binary stars, and it's like something wasn't quite right. And so as he looked into it a little more closely, it turns out that there was a planet orbiting around those two stars as well. And so just by taking the computer to get the data sorted, but then also looking a little closer, he was able to discover a planet, which that's pretty cool as a 17-year-old.
So that is yet another exoplanet or extrasolar planet, meaning a planet outside of our solar system, right?
Right, yes.
So how many are we up to by now?
It's well over 4,000. And it's kind of the place where you can't keep track. Every now and again you go look and you say, okay, that. But a lot of those were found with the Kepler Telescope, and so like I said, it found thousands of them, and so we found a lot of them out there.
So are they being discovered like weekly almost, or how often?
Because the Kepler Telescope found them, the next time we put a telescope up that can find planets, it's going to find a lot. Right now, there isn't one specifically looking for them. So there's every now and again one will come up through some of the other techniques, but it'll stay in the 4,000 or 5,000 range for a while. So
the reason that this particular exoplanet garnered some attention was because folks like me and a lot of the common folk who love Star Wars, they were excited that a planet is orbiting a binary system, so we can get something like Tatooine. Right? I know, that just harkens back to Luke there, wistfully staring, oh, my uncle's destroying my life. Yeah, that's the imagery ascribed there. And so it is kind of exciting. It's not the first planet formed around, or that we've discovered around a binary star, but the fact that a teenager discovered it, that just, it's a little closer to the imagery there. Oh, yeah. And what's really cool is that you've written an article called Star Wars Apologetics, and you tie in kind of the excitement that average, people who will be interested in Star Wars, like they get excited about these discoveries. Maybe they're interested in science, but maybe a little bit more so into pop culture and into things like Star Wars. Right. So you have written about how we can use those topics like Star Wars to have conversations about our faith. So how do you do that? Like, let's unpack that for a bit. Well, it's just, you take a look at Star Wars, and I think one of those questions, independent of Star Wars, that everybody thinks is there life out there? Right. Well, Star Wars certainly has an answer to that question. You've got life on planets orbiting binary stars. You've got life on moons of planets protected by force fields. You've got life on completely constructed moons, and then you've got gorilla-like Wookiees, and you've got slug-like Hutts, and you've got the musically talented Bith. There's just all sorts of life out there in this Star Wars universe. And so that as a Christian, we could weigh in on that conversation because people are already interested in it. You don't have to get them interested, but yet the science kind of comes in and says, hey, we can talk about that in a way more than just, is that a cool movie? Yeah, and I love that you do that because that is a great kind of conversation starter when we're talking about Tatooine and the excitement of that. And then we talk about extrasolar planets and the abundance of them. We can kind of get into a conversation about what that abundance, if we have 4,000 extrasolar planets, what does that mean about our humble little Earth? Like, are we not so special maybe? Right, and that's where with just a little bit of science training, you can kind of bring in, because the most of the people you're going to be talking to, if you study a little bit of science, you're going to be a little bit better equipped than them. And so, talking about planets orbiting double stars like that, everybody thinks, oh, well, Luke was there. And, but now you can transition. Is that something that really could possibly happen? Because if you look, the places where we've seen that, we can actually calculate how much light a planet is getting in a system like that. And the amount of light is fluctuating by 10, 15, 20%. To give you a little bit of perspective, that if the solar luminosity changed by about 1%,
we would either have global cooling or runaway heating.
Right.
You know, so the fact that it's 10 or 15% over a few days type things, that's going to have a dramatic impact on that, or on the planet that would be orbiting this binary star that's supposedly habitable. So
right, and its ability to support life.
exactly,
then, right?
yeah.
Right.
So by bringing in a little bit of the science, you change it from the Star Wars gets you interested in the topic, changing it over to what does the science actually have to say, and does the science really support the idea that there's just life living everywhere out there?
Yeah, and it seems like what you're saying is that no, when we start to look at habitability for advanced life, that maybe these planets they aren't showing signs that they can support advanced life. But then the next question is, well, what does that mean that Earth can, and how do we engage that from a Christian perspective?
Right. Well, and we look at it, and there's just a whole slew of things about the Earth that is incredibly conducive to life. And even if we just compare with Mars and Venus, our closest neighbors, Earth looks radically different. I mean, it's covered in liquid water. It's got continents. It's got tectonic activity. It's got this incredibly diverse array of life, even in the midst of these kind of remarkable changes of how much oxygen's in the atmosphere and how bright is the sun and what kind of life's there and how the continents have changed. In spite of all that, Earth has been incredibly habitable for a few billion years. Right. You know, so when you contrast that, now you look out at Mercury or Venus and Mars, and we say they kind of started they're very similar to Earth. They're habitable in a lot of those catalogs, if you will. They look very different. They're just desolate, barren, hostile to life. And so it gives us a tie back. You know, when you read Genesis 1, that's what God's describing. God takes a planet that is hostile to life there in Genesis 1-2, and then works to make it abundant and teeming with life. So it kind of gives a tie into how do we talk about what Scripture has to say, and does the science support that?
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I think there's probably plenty of resources on reasons.org. Is there a particular resource you would point our viewers to?
Well, I think I have an article. I think I have an article titled "Star Wars Apologetics."
Yes.
That would be a great place to start, because it's going to link off to some of those others that'll get you equipped on some of the details.
You're right. Well, thank you so much for that. If you want to hear more, check out Star Wars Apologetics on reasons.org.